Every time Kang Sol closed his eyes, a world from his dreams appeared before him, filled with peace and joy. But at the same time, there were moments when merciless battles raged within his dreams. This dream repeated itself with frightening accuracy for 17 years, showing the young man the same images over and over again. In reality, the hero stood at the cash register, ringing up another purchase and moving as automatically as he had yesterday. His name was Kang Sol, a 25-year-old guy who announced prices to customers with the same lifeless politeness as he had done thousands of times before. For an orphan with no education or connections, his only chance of survival was to work in a 24-hour store where time flowed in a faceless stream. Somewhere nearby, two guys were animatedly discussing how one of them couldn't believe his friend was dating a girl, and Kang Sol glanced at them indifferently. He just kept doing his routine stuff, like a machine that didn't notice the world around him. There was something strange about this young man. For 17 years in a row, he had been having the same dream every night. And although the dreams sometimes turned into nightmares, they remained the only place where he could hide from his gray life in a cramped room and endless night shifts. Kang Sol first saw this strange and beautiful dream in a children's shelter when he was just a child and did not know what real fear meant. Then he suddenly realized that he was in an unfamiliar dimension where a grandiose building towered in the middle of the fog. The boy walked toward it uncertainly, as if driven by a force that did not ask for his consent. At the entrance, he was met by a figure wearing a fox mask, and from the voice and ease of movement, he guessed that it was a girl who allowed him to pass. The stranger led him into a huge banquet hall where hundreds of people hid their faces behind masks. One of the guests, whose mask resembled the beak of a bird of prey, announced that it was time to roll the dice, and the silence in the hall was broken. When the dice touched the table, the space exploded with a glow so bright that it seemed as if the sky itself had entered the room. A moment later, Kang Sol realized that he was no longer a child. He was wearing unfamiliar clothes and a heavy mask that hid his face. One of the participants greeted him with a smile and invited him to sit down next to him, as if they had known each other for a long time. The fox girl leaned toward him and asked what name he would like to be called among those gathered at the table. The young man thought that everything that was happening was unreal, so he decided to use his nickname in the game, Snowman. The fox nodded approvingly and said that after the introduction, he could create a character to control in the upcoming game. The guy froze for a moment, realizing that he himself would become a participant in something like a magical board game, and his heart beat faster with excitement. A character creation window popped up in front of him, where he had to choose a profession and attribute from among the flashing symbols and glowing icons. Deciding that he could afford to take risks in a dream, he chose a mage with a frost attribute so that he could keep his cool even in a fictional world. The air trembled with a whirlwind of energy, and the spirit of magic swirled in white light, creating a figure with an icy gaze and glowing hands before him. The blonde knight who was watching the process approved of his choice and noted that Snowman looked too confident for a beginner. In the next moment, the game began. The opponent threw the dice, and it hung in the air for a few seconds before touching the table. Thus began Kanasolya's first game, and the guests, long accustomed to such spectacles, watched the action with predatory interest. The man in the clown costume snorted and remarked that with such success, they usually didn't go easy on them here, and suggested that Snowman roll the dice. Kang Sol gathered his courage, picked up the dice, and felt that the fate of the whole world depended on his throw. Options flashed before him, including the choice to run away, to bind the enemy's legs with a sharp sword, and several others. After a moment's thought, the hero chose the third risky path, to freeze the enemy's legs with cold magic. His character raised his staff, and the ice spell, responding to an inner impulse, glowed with a blue light. A dazzling glow swirled around him, in which cold and flame seemed to intertwine, tearing space in half. The demonic green reptile from his team remarked admiringly that Snowman had chosen a brilliant strategy. The man in the mask with the eagle's beak nodded quietly and declared that it was now his turn, slowly raising the cube. At that moment, the knight stepped forward, swinging his massive sword, and the air was filled with the ringing of metal. A moment later, the enemy collapsed to the ground, paralyzed and broken. A system notification flashed before Kanasol's eyes, informing him that the leader of the key ship had been defeated and the adventure had been successfully completed. The fox announced that today's adventure had come to an end and asked the participants if they had felt the beauty of the world of eternity. Kang Sol thought that this was an amazing game, in which the fate of the characters was decided not only by luck, but also by intelligence, and realized that he had never experienced such excitement before. The man with the eagle's beak admitted that he did not expect the game to be so exciting and suggested that Snowman return tomorrow. The young man agreed, deciding that there was no point in pondering the nature of this dream, because whoever these guys were, it was fun and lively here. Since then, every night he explored the world of eternity with this strange company, although none of the real people believed these stories. The children from the orphanage thought he was making up fairy tales, and some even whispered that their friend had lost his mind. Over time, the others turned away completely, deciding not to associate with someone who lived in his own illusions. So Kang Sol gradually became a silent loner, branded as a liar, unable to fit into the gray reality of the orphanage. Now, when he returned to his room in the evening, his body felt as if it were filled with lead, and all he wanted to do was lie down and not move. But inside, he was confident that while others slept in reality, he was able to return to his dazzling world of dreams, where he could forget all his earthly troubles. Soon, Kang Sol found himself once again in front of the same majestic castle, shrouded in thick, glowing fog. The man with the eagle's beak, noticing his appearance, smiled and said that Snowman was a little late today. The fox admitted that she had been hoping to see him again, and Kang Sol felt a rare warmth that he had never known in reality. Over the years, he had often wondered who all these people were. Perhaps spirits, perhaps gods, but he was afraid that trying to find out the truth would destroy the very magic of the dream. The young man simply threw the dice, laughed along with them, and this noise, filled with excitement and light, became the most vivid part of his existence. But today, everything had changed. The fair-haired knight announced that the snowman would play alone, because his previous adventure as a sage had never been completed. The clown confirmed that they would have to retreat, and another participant noted that the previous figures were great, but none had achieved ascension, and now was their last chance. These words sounded like a prophecy, with the road to heaven ahead, the final test in the world of eternity. Over 17 years of gaming, Kang Sol had created many legendary characters and became a hero to many, almost reaching the top. But, like everything in a dream, this world had to end one day. The participants were informed that the trial version was coming to an end, and the official release would begin soon. Kang Sol felt that his friends clearly understood what was happening better than he did, because now they were being offered ascension if this was their last game. Sadness quietly filled his heart, because the young man was not ready to say goodbye to the world where he had lived for 17 years, and he thought that if they had given him a little more time, he would have created the 31st truly perfect figure. The fox said there was no need to be sad. The trial version was coming to an end, but tomorrow the official release would begin, where their dreams would become reality. The blonde knight noted that they had already stayed too long and now had to regain their divinity and take revenge on the insects that had deprived them of their power. Kang Sol didn't understand what they were talking about, what divinity was, who the insects were, but he felt that there was something much more than a dream behind this game. He pushed his doubts aside and concentrated. Now everything depended on a single roll of the dice, and only ascension could be a worthy finale. Over the years, only 9 of the 30 figures he had created had reached this stage, and now he had one last chance to write his name in the history of the world of eternity. When the young man threw the dice, the air burst with an explosion of mana, and a flash of light blinded everyone present, reflecting the power of accumulated knowledge. The system reported that the magical feedback pierced Milan as the explosion was at the ascension stage. Kang Sol, gritting his teeth, once again stepped onto the shining staircase of ascension toward the raging hurricane. On one of the turns of the shining staircase, Milan stumbled, lost his balance, and fell into the void, catching hold of a cracked step. The magical wind instantly caught the boy, spinning him in a dazzling whirlwind, and he flew down, unable to scream or stop. Milan, his figure, suffered defeat once again. His 9th attempt at ascension ended in failure, and luck once again turned its back on the snowman. For a few seconds, he just sat there, staring into the void in front of him, feeling anger, despair, and stubbornness fighting inside him. The boy clenched his teeth so hard that his temples throbbed, history repeating itself exactly as it had every time before. He was faced with a decision: to end Milan's adventure or to try to give him another chance, despite everything. Kang Sol smiled bitterly, thinking that even in a game, it was difficult to get to heaven. He stared at the screen, where his character lay broken and lifeless on the ground. The hero pressed the yes button, choosing to end the game, and decided not to take any further action. The system coldly announced that Milan's fate was now entirely in his hands. The adventure was over, but life, as always, went on. The guys tried to comfort him. Snowman was the only one who really coped. They did everything they could, even reaching the chance of ascension, and it was only thanks to him. The guy thought he would still be able to break through at least at the end, but luck turned away, and yet it was fun, and so ended the world of eternity. However, this was not the end. A dazzling light flashed right in front of him, and the hero looked ahead, unable to look away. Clouds swirled around him, white and endless, and it all seemed strange and unreal. Kang's soul was already sure that it was all over, but suddenly he heard joyful voices welcoming the new hero. The very people with whom he had gone through all the trials appeared before him. The young man heard accusations that he had deceived everyone, that he had pretended to be God, when in fact he was only playing a role. Now the hero himself had become a figure on this board, and the blonde knight coldly declared that he must be captured. At that moment, an invisible force squeezed his neck like a chain of pure energy. Kangsul felt as if he had been pierced by a powerful magical discharge. Unimaginable. Why they suddenly decided to attack him remained an unanswered question, but at that moment, the young man only felt his neck burning. Many accusations were hurled at him, and those who had once fought alongside him in the game now turned against him. The young man had tried to deceive the gods themselves and must die for it. Kangsul's eyes widened in horror, and only one question echoed in his head. What had they just said, and how was such a thing even possible? The distraught young man grabbed the collar that bound his neck, but the enemy had already unleashed a powerful magical attack on him. The blonde knight declared that this was where the young man would meet his end. Kangsul couldn't believe that his death would really be so pitiful and fleeting. Suddenly, a voice declared that he had not consented to such a trial. In the next moment, a man in a business suit and a mask that emitted a faint glow appeared before everyone. At that moment, the blonde knight grabbed Kangsul and lifted him into the air, turning to Corden and wondering what the problem was. The others supported him, claiming that Kangsul had insulted each of them and deserved punishment. Corden calmly said that they needed to calm down and not act rashly. Kangsul thought about how he had already seen Corden in the world of eternity, and a glimmer of hope flashed through his mind that this man could help him. Meanwhile, one of the most influential players said that blood should not be shed in heaven. He proposed that the boy be sent back to where he came from. But the other players asked in confusion if he was serious and what the point of that was. Corden continued his thought, saying that of course they would not let him go so easily, and although he was undoubtedly guilty, everyone seemed to have forgotten what day it was today. The masked men began to look at each other in confusion, not understanding what he was getting at. It suddenly dawned on Lasitsa that today was Harvest Day, and that was why the guys had decided that the intruder really should be sent back. The mage added a harsh speech, declaring that the boy would go where he belonged, to the land where dreams become reality and die like an insignificant worm in the name of madness. This was too much, and Kangsul screamed in horror, the tension reaching its limit, and he couldn't even imagine how to understand it all. Finally, the young man sank to his knees, exhausted, and mockery rang out from all sides, with enemies saying that heaven could not be stained with the blood of this pathetic nobody. He knew nothing when he came here, and thought that everything would go unpunished, like in a game. The knight coldly declared that his fate was to die on earth, and that the boy should not even look the gods in the eye. In despair, Kangsul realized that his last hope had collapsed, that Corden was not going to save him, but only wanted to cause him even more pain. But suddenly, amid the chaos, the young man heard a caring voice asking how Snowman was feeling. A little puzzled, he looked around, and the voice said that only Kangsul could hear these words. The young man turned around and couldn't believe his eyes. It was Corden himself speaking to him. The mage said he knew who he was, but there was no time for explanations, so they should get to the point. The world Kangsul was used to was about to change dramatically, and today the worlds would unite. The earth would merge with the world of eternity, and the young man was shocked, unable to understand how this was possible and why it had to happen. Corden explained that the gods had chosen the path of madness instead of faith in order to restore their powers. All the works and stories of humanity would be exchanged for madness, and it would help the gods regain their lost power. Kang's soul still couldn't fully comprehend the meaning of what was happening, and Corden noted that there was only one way to save the people. He had to reach the final adventure, which he had failed before Ascension, and collect as much madness as possible. It would come in handy. At that moment, the young man heard a final warning not to meddle in the affairs of heaven, otherwise the gods would intervene. He didn't understand how to pass Ascension, because it wasn't a game, and he had failed the mission so many times. However, Corden did not explain anything, and only wished him luck in the task, adding that he hoped they would meet again. With these words, Kang's soul did not have time to understand what was happening when a magical force from his companion's hand began to lift him up. A moment later, the guy realized that he was in the sky, and right below his feet lay the living planet Earth with its houses and streets. Corden remarked that they would watch the worm writhe before its death, and the others laughed, anticipating the spectacle. The moment the magician lowered his hand, everything around them changed dramatically. The scenery shifted, and reality seemed to crumble. Kang's soul, having completely lost his balance, fell rapidly downward, but he was caught by a whirlwind and a raging hurricane. His former comrades watched indifferently from above, showing not the slightest concern for his fate. Meanwhile, everyone present began to discuss the harvest of madness and instantly forgot about the young hero. Corden addressed the gathering, calling them dear noble gods. Kang's soul found himself in complete darkness, in a black space, trying for a few moments to look around and understand where he was. Finally, the boy realized that he had survived after all, and thank God everything seemed to be fine. As he had suspected, all his previous guesses had been correct. The people who had been playing with him were real gods, not just figments of his imagination, but physical beings. Kang's soul began to look around, trying to understand where exactly he was. At that moment, a notification appeared in front of him, stating that the loading of the world of eternity was beginning. A moment later, a welcome message appeared, explaining that he had entered the world of eternity. The hero, puzzled, stared straight ahead, not understanding what was happening, because Pandia was from the world of the game. An incredible mountainous landscape appeared before the guy, and a gloomy castle towered in the distance. He really was inside the game, and although it was difficult to verify, the feeling was absolutely real. The system reported that more than 7 billion people had joined the world of eternity. It was extremely strange, and Kang's soul stared at the screen in confusion, not understanding how it had happened. However, his thoughtfulness was soon interrupted by a strange sound vibration nearby, which made the guy flinch. Many more people appeared nearby, and the system notified him that he needed to choose his character's attributes as the first adventure was about to begin. The guy couldn't believe it. All of humanity had ended up in the world of eternity, and the unification of worlds had become a reality. He remembered Corden's words that the world the young man was used to would soon change, and today the worlds would unite. Now he had to gather his thoughts together. The game had not been just a dream all this time, but had become his new reality. But that wasn't all. Words that his enemy had said to him flashed through Kang's soul's mind. Corden had threatened him, saying he shouldn't dare look him in the eye, and that he would die on the ground like a worm. Kang's soul remembered how they called him a worm, and noticed that his former comrades were clearly arrogant. A moment later, he clenched his fist. But they clearly underestimated this worm who was able to deceive everyone. At that moment, determination boiled inside the boy. He was no longer just a figure on a board. Now he was going to prove that he could survive. His traumatic upbringing in the orphanage had resurfaced, reopening old wounds. Now the situation was repeating itself with those to whom he had once given his heart, and it upset him greatly. Kang's soul thought that if he deserved this just because he was born human, then it was unfair. But the hero was at least able to get angry at these self-proclaimed gods. Deciding to use the experience he had accumulated over 17 years, the young man pressed the create button and set his mind on achieving success in many endeavors. A moment later, the system announced that the character creation was complete, and the hero decided that he would become a unique 31st figure who would definitely take revenge and get to them. The Shadow Summoner Snowman entered the world of Eternal Pandemic, similar to a board game where starting attributes decide everything, just like in life. Now the game had become reality, and death meant the end. So he needed a character capable of achieving ascension without obstacles. In the world of eternity, it was possible to choose several requirements at once, which made it possible to create something unique. But because of this system, there were preferred and lagging classes. In his previous attempts, the young man had relied heavily on other players, but now he was completely alone. Among all the suggestions, there was one combination that the guy had never tried until the end of the trial period, and he decided to take it: the shadow attribute with all the points in wisdom, cooking, and perception. Summoner, a rather unremarkable plan, dealing little damage and of little use in support, but combining two such weak attributes could result in an interesting combination. Soon, the Shadow Summoner Snowman was transported to the pandemic world of eternity. The first adventure was chosen at random, and a mission description titled Moonlight Dance appeared before him. Traps were scattered throughout the pandemic, and in order not to die, he had to learn how to find them, because the place was created for training. The hero boldly set off on his first adventure and reached the unknown ruins. In these ruins, he had to pass at least one test: the ruins of the Forgotten Moon, and receive a reward or die if he failed. The guy thoughtfully read everything he saw and noticed that the ruins of the Forgotten Moon sounded familiar to him. Kang-Sol remembered that these were adventures for beginners, designed to introduce them to the nuances of the world of eternity. At first glance, the difficulty was surprisingly high, and he often had to move forward while constantly taking damage. The ruins of the Forgotten Moon were full of traps, and this could be a serious problem for him, since the young man had no class or skill in neutralizing danger. In addition, he was a shadow summoner, a spellcaster who moved very slowly, and he had spent all his attribute points on wisdom. Kang-Sol understood that it would not be easy and that he would have to make every effort. Sometimes the young hero even thought that he would have chosen a different class if he had known in advance what his first adventure would be like. The guy thought ironically that the familiar scene had now become reality. He had really become a figure. The ruins of the Forgotten Moon stood right in front of him, and Kang-Sol found himself at a massive door leading inside. There were two options for where to start: interact with the door or with the lever, but it was unclear which choice would be the right one. A moment later, a notification window opened in front of him, which was quite unexpected. Kang-Sol suddenly realized that he could see the options for action and wondered if this was the case for everyone or just for him. Perhaps the system would give hints. Although the young man had long since learned all the rules, there had been a trial version before, and the hero thought that the choices might change in the release version, but fortunately, that did not happen. Kang-Sol smiled slyly, realizing that now he would be able to pass through the ruins and complete the task before him. The guy had been playing this game for 17 years, moving left first and then turning right, as old habits taught him. Choosing the best options was his forte, and if there had been more of them, he would not have relied solely on his memory. But in this situation, there was no doubt, and the gate really opened in front of him. He looked thoughtfully into the depths of the gloomy building, which looked gray and lifeless. Kang-Sol began to walk cautiously across the floor, feeling that this place was familiar to him. The young man glanced at the system again to check what it was saying about the current situation. He noticed that this was the first trial of the ruins of the Forgotten Moon, which he had already passed before. He had to step on the tiles and cross to the other side, but the wrong choice could have terrible consequences. Then the trap was activated, and he had to make every effort to cope with the situation. This was not a game, but real life, where the hero was just one step away from death and the unknown. Kang-Sol had tried almost all the main talents that existed in the world of eternity and knew all the hidden choices that specific options opened up. The most important thing was his knowledge, and it was not for nothing that he rolled the dice and chose options back then. The guy looked up and saw the answer to the amazing riddle that appeared before him. He did not have the talent of archaeology or theology to read all the inscriptions, but the young man grasped the main essence. The lion was fierce, unyielding, too proud and majestic. Meanwhile, the sheep was obedient, walking last and bowing its head. The generous moon embraced everyone, and the wolf followed right after the tiger. Everything seemed quite obvious. At first glance, it might have seemed complicated, but the point was simply to step on the tiles in the right order. Kang-Sol came to the conclusion that it was extremely simple. You just had to repeat the sequence to avoid getting hurt. With a slight feeling of excitement, but still confident in his choice, the guy stepped forward. He moved slowly across the tiles, choosing the correct sequence of animals engraved on the stone floor. His first choice was the lion, and when there was no reaction, Kang-Sol realized he had done everything right. Following his own logic, he took another step, and his heart filled with anticipation. Kang-Sol smiled with satisfaction, glad that he had solved the riddle, Everything was happening exactly as he had expected. His confidence returned with each movement and each new step. Soon the young man was quickly and decisively striding across all the slabs leading to the other side. He passed the test safely, caught his breath, and found himself in the next hall, where the air was filled with a light silver glow. The hero raised an eyebrow and smiled to himself, thinking that this task had turned out to be much easier than he had expected. The system reported that the young man had passed the ruins of the Forgotten Moon without damage, and the copper chest turned into an iron one, but it was possible to refuse the reward and continue the test. Kang Sol thought hard. The reward looked tempting, but if he took a risk and went further, he could get much more. After a moment's thought, the young man decided to continue on his way, because as he remembered, the ruins of the Forgotten Moon were created to teach the player humility, and greed often becomes the last choice. This was not a problem for the young hero. He decided that he would not succumb to the temptation of an easy reward and cautiously peered into the next corridor. A long tunnel stretched out before him, and Kansol immediately recognized it as the second trial of the ruins of the Forgotten Moon. There was no room for error here. It was a trap, the essence of which was to move forward despite the constant threat that each step could be his last. But this time, something was different. The young man's eyes widened when he realized that the corridor had become much longer than he remembered. With despair, Kang Sol realized that his old knowledge was useless. The system warned that he could only step on red, blue, and black tiles, and each time the order of their activation changed. The guy cursed quietly. He didn't have the necessary talents, such as trap disarming or mechanical engineering, that could make the task easier. He looked up and noticed his reflection on the smooth wall. In the dim light, it seemed unfamiliar, and the hero examined himself for a few seconds. The black stripe on his neck reminded him of the past, the mark left by the collar. A gift from the god of lightning, anger flared in his chest, and the young man swore that one day he would repay them in full. But now was not the time for hatred. Kang Sol took a deep breath, concentrated, and slowly stepped forward onto the red tile. Who knows, maybe he would guess the correct order and pass the test, even though his body was already trembling slightly from the tension. The young hero slowly looked at the colorful stripes in front of him, covering the entire corridor like snakeskins. He made up his mind and stepped on the blue tile, hoping that his choice would be the right one. But at that moment, the air exploded with a sharp, hollow bang, causing Kang Sol to freeze instinctively. Pain shot through his body. He cried out, and his muscles cramped from the vibration that ran through his entire body. However, this only fueled his excitement. Deep down, the young man felt a strange pleasure from the risk and thought that things were getting really interesting. At that moment, observers above watched him with keen interest, and one of them, known as Hell, even threw a sacrifice into the bowl, a coin of madness. Meanwhile, Kang Sol continued on his way, and as soon as he made another mistake, a trap instantly sprang from the wall. He cursed silently, deciding that the creators of this test were ruthless bastards, because who would think of putting 4 red tiles in a row? Next came red, blue, and black symbols, and the young man, frowning, thought that since red had prevailed before, it was worth trying the other one. After thinking for a moment, the young man decided to take a chance and choose the blue strip, hoping that his intuition would finally not let him down. However, this choice also turned out to be wrong, and at that moment, laughter swept through the hall. Kang Sol gritted his teeth and thought that one wrong move and he would be crushed. The audience was already convinced that the guy was doomed, and someone said that the only chance for this madman was to run at full speed without thinking. But suddenly, to their amazement, Kang Sol sprang from his seat and began to stride forward rapidly, knowing exactly where to put his feet. His movements became confident and precise, and those who watched this test could not believe their eyes. They whispered to each other in confusion, not understanding what had happened to this guy and how he had suddenly changed. Meanwhile, the system announced that the analysis was complete, and it was now clear that he had figured out the logic of the trap. Kang Sol remembered that the sequence of tiles always repeated every 5 steps, and once he understood this pattern, everything became obvious. The observers, clenching their fists in anger, realized that the guy had figured out their test, and now the trap was useless to him. The gods, struck by his success, only asked each other in disappointment who had come up with such a stupid sequence. Meanwhile, the system announced that Kang Sol had passed the second test of the ruins of the Forgotten Moon and could choose his reward. The silver chest that appeared turned gold, because the trap had been activated less than 10 times. The young man looked thoughtfully at the shining chest standing right in front of him. He thought that now he could safely take the trophy and end the adventure, because the goal had been achieved. But after a moment's hesitation, he stopped, as if something inside him protested against taking the easy way out. And in a moment, gathering his courage, the hero resolutely walked past the chest. The hero quickly moved forward along the dark corridor and soon saw a massive door with engraved symbols in front of him. Behind it was Moon Square, a place where warnings flashed brightly on the door, saying that travelers should not be arrogant and should know their place. In addition, the inscription reminded him of the need to be humble. Kang's soul was sure that the bastard he was thinking of was definitely there. The system offered two options: ignore the warning and test his strength, or admit his weakness and retreat. It was an obvious choice, but Kang's soul, bringing his hand closer to the glowing inscription, sank into thought for a few moments. However, this hesitation was only a formality. Deep down, the young man knew perfectly well that he would never choose the path of retreat. The next moment, the door burst open with a furious crash, as if the moon itself was angry at his audacity. The young hero stepped forward and froze, struck by the grandeur of the hall that opened before him. In the center stood a knight, a giant in heavy forged armor, decorated with lunar symbols and iron chains. Kang's soul immediately understood that the next trial was connected with this warrior. The knight's eyes burned with a dazzling, scorching light, filled with contempt, as if he were looking at an insignificant creature. The enemy angrily declared that he was facing a smug youngster, and this scoundrel who dared to enter where he was not supposed to would regret his actions. He declared that he would cut off the head of the insolent intruder, and that it would happen very soon. Kang's soul smiled slightly, thinking that they had not seen each other for a long time, and this meeting promised to be particularly spectacular. Meanwhile, the knight raised his weapon, and fiery whirlwinds flared up around him, filled with the magic of the moon. The Moon Knight Karuna was ready to attack. Meanwhile, another player threw the dice and cursed irritably, not hiding his anger and confusion. He did not understand what was happening. This opponent seemed to be breaking all the rules of the game, and no one knew how to defeat him. The players were indignant because they had been promised that in this game, they would simply roll the dice and have fun, not suffer through deadly trials. But no matter how many attempts they made, it always ended the same way. The monster destroyed them every time without the slightest effort. The trial called Dance on a Moonlit Night appeared only at the very end of the ruins of the Forgotten Moon, and its arena was the legendary Moon Square. There was only one safe zone there, a small pedestal that could be climbed to briefly wait out the attack. However, Kang's soul, deftly dodging another blow, realized that it was pointless to hope for this pedestal. He simply would not have time to run there. At that moment, his opponent raised his sword again, and the space around them trembled with the lunar power concentrated in the blade. If even one attack from the Moon Knight reached its target, all the light around would turn to ash. Such was the essence of this nightmarish trial. It was considered one of the deadliest, because even the strongest players died here with a single blow, overestimating their own strength. Meanwhile, a system notification popped up next to Kang's soul, and the young man immediately turned his attention to it. Several tiles appeared in front of him, and now he had to step on them in the correct order. First on the tile with the black sheep, then on the one with the black wolf, and so on. This was the only way to proceed, and as far as the young man remembered, not only the symbols but also the colors and their strict sequence were crucial for successful clearing. The order remained the same as in the first test and had to be maintained until he exited the ruins. At that moment, the magical enemy gathered speed and rushed towards him like a storm of fire and metal. Kang's soul deftly jumped out of the way of the direct hit and noticed that the first tile he needed was right below him. The hero confidently stepped onto it, onto the red image of a lion shining in the light of the moon's magic. The young man remembered that each color had a unique effect and watched as the knight opposite him stopped in surprise, noticing some changes. The red tiles weakened Karun's aura, depriving him of some of his strength, slowing his movements, and weakening his protective barrier. Kang's soul realized that the time to act had come and prepared to step on the next tile to enhance the effect and seize the initiative. A moment later, the young man stopped on the red lion and then, without losing momentum, stepped forward and found himself on the red moon. He was very close to his opponent, but the knight no longer looked as powerful as before. Karuna had become noticeably slower and now made more excessive movements in the heat of battle. The effect of the red tiles increased threefold, and Kang Sol, noticing this, cautiously moved forward. In front of him was a tile with the image of a black sheep, and the young man decided it was time to take the next step. The moment Karuna approached with unyielding force, the hero had already managed to step on the right symbol. Behind the knight, a magical device opened up, releasing a powerful stream of fire aimed directly at his back. The black tiles activated the attack traps, dealing significant damage to the enemy, but at the same time fueling the moon barrier protecting the opponent. Kang Sol realized that he now needed to break through the defense again, stepping on the red tiles before continuing his attack. It would not be possible to defeat this enemy quickly. Karuna, however, laughed maliciously at the hero and said mockingly that the intruder was too confident if he thought these tricks would save him. Meanwhile, Kang Sol noticed his enemy's stance and realized that the moonlight slash could kill instantly. The enemy decided to use this power for a final attack, focusing all his magical energy on the young man. In such a situation, it was extremely difficult to orient oneself, because the magical attack was flying in all directions at once. Despite the barrage of blows, Kang Sol remained unharmed when the dust settled, because he was able to defend himself with the help of the moonlight. The spectators came to the conclusion that his survival was due to the fact that he was standing on a blue tile that activated protection. At that moment, one of the observers announced that he was the first person to pass the final test. Meanwhile, the young man moved decisively, and when Karuna attacked again, decided to step on the red tile. The knight angrily declared that this battle would end in failure for the young hero and that death was inevitable. Kang Sol fearlessly met his opponent's gaze, demonstrating complete confidence in his abilities. When the boy played with his former comrades, he was often asked if there was a reason why he went so far. Then a friend wearing a lightning mask remarked that Kang Sol had decided to perform the moonlight dance. The other participants were amazed when they realized that the three red tiles could slow down the enemy as much as possible, and they came up with a strategy not to win, but simply to survive and escape. The black tile did almost no damage, but it activated the enemy's deadly attack, so using it was extremely risky. Kang Sol began to explain that the principle of the battle was extremely simple. Meanwhile, Karuna received a powerful blow and froze for a few moments, not expecting such a turn of events. The young hero stood on the black sheep and watched the enemy's every move, realizing that only this path would lead to victory. The knight's armor was visibly cracked, and he was breathing heavily, struggling to maintain his balance. The enemy said that the boy should not underestimate the power of moonlight. The next moment, he activated his magical abilities again, directing a stream of energy straight at Kang Sol. The hero instantly got his bearings and decided that the only way to survive was to step on the red square. At the moment when the knight became completely powerless, the guy decided that it was time to step on the black image. A moment later, he jumped forward decisively and stood on the image of a black sheep. The blow that struck the knight caused him to freeze for a few seconds. Victory was just around the corner. The opponent had already lost almost all of his armor. Karuna couldn't believe what was happening. He didn't understand why this stubborn guy was going so far. Meanwhile, the system announced that the Moon Knight was engulfed in light and taking heavy damage, but his agility was steadily increasing until the battle ended. The knight thought that without his deadly attack, he would not be so notorious, but he declared fiercely that he would defeat the enemy anyway and rushed forward. Kang Sol realized that the pattern of the moon steps had changed, and now it was impossible to slow down the enemy with the red tiles. Therefore, he decided that it was time to block the attack using the blue tiles. The young man said that it was time to end this duel, his voice sounding firm and determined. Karuna angrily declared that this insolent youngster should be humble and remember that violators always answer for their actions. But Kang Sol deftly dodged the blow and thought that this would be the last attack in their duel. The knight used his deadly technique again, the moonlight slash, and the fight flared up with renewed vigor. Kang Sol knew that if he didn't dodge in time, he would die on the spot. The only thing left for him to do was to continue moving across the tiles in the right sequence and strike between flashes of light. Moonlight Dance, a name that perfectly matched what was happening because their fight really resembled a crazy, deadly dance. The hero watched every step, stepping on the right tiles even when magic raged around him and stone walls collapsed. Karuna shouted furiously that he would destroy this insolent mortal, but in the next second he suddenly froze. His eyes widened in amazement when he realized that the attack was inevitable. The blow was delivered with such precision that there was no chance to dodge it. The knight's helmet flew several meters away, exposing his head. For a few moments, they stood facing each other, moving tensely and not taking their eyes off each other. Finally, Karuna sadly lowered his head, turned to his master, and admitted that he had failed in his mission. The knight asked for forgiveness just as the final blow fell upon him. Kan's soul caught his breath, watched as the defeated enemy fell to the cold stone floor, and the sword rolled away with a soft clink. The system announced that he had successfully passed the final trial of the Forgotten Moon Ruins. He was offered a choice of rewards, a chest of treasures appeared, and with it, the hero received the achievement of Moon Hunter and the title of the one who toppled the moon. Kang-sul remembered the words of the god in the lightning mask, who once wondered why he was trying to defeat Karun instead of simply avoiding battle. The young man mentally replied that bypassing the enemy was not the best choice, because defeating him was much more appropriate. With these thoughts, he looked thoughtfully at the defeated knight. This was a conscious reason for choosing this particular method, and he held his hand out in front of him. Kang-sul released a magical effect on the knight and ordered him to serve him. This was the use of shadow summoning, his unique characteristic. After a while, the system reported that the shadow of the Moon Knight Karuna had been successfully summoned. Karuna's shadow could not copy the moonlight, so its ability degraded until the full moon broke. The rank of the summoned shadow was too low, inheriting only 20% of its original power. The audience was completely shocked, because this guy was considered a novice. But he looked completely different, as if a true professional was standing before them. Kang-sul looked at his subordinate, smiled, and thought that everything was very good. Although his power had decreased to 20%, the hero-class summon gave him a chance to survive. Because to summon a shadow, you only need to defeat an enemy with a shadow. Now it was time to check the reward. The young hero had been promoted to a higher level, and with it came several new characteristics. In the world of eternity, leveling up gave 4 fixed attribute points and 4 selectable ones, with the fixed ones added depending on the profession. The remaining points could be distributed as desired, and Kang-sul, as a true shadow summoner, decided to increase his wisdom. Among the rewards was a useful item, the Moonlight Sword, which he received for defeating Karupa. The Moon Knight's sword, which he had used before becoming an apostle, had outstanding characteristics. The young man decided to give it to his ward, because the summoner's shadows had their own characteristics, could be upgraded independently, and could change equipment. Other types of summoned creatures depended on the strength of their master and did not require individual investment, but shadows were much more effective in the long run. Kang-sul also received a staff that enhanced wisdom, as he knew the potential of this artifact, although the audience could not understand why he chose this particular parameter, since wisdom was considered a useless characteristic. In addition, he received an item that the hero did not even hope to get. It had to be eaten, and the guy knew a special method that could increase its effectiveness. Finishing his inspection, the young hero studied the new data in his system with obvious satisfaction. The special effect of the item turned out to be questionable, but the guy decided that if it worked on Karupa, then it could also enhance his characteristics. A few moments later, the hero finished checking the rewards he had received and was quite pleased with the result. Now it was time to move on. With a new challenge ahead, the next adventure called 5 Friendly Brothers. In the southern foothills of the Pandaya Mountains lived tribes of hideous trolls, and one of them, the Stone Fang tribe, chose its leader in a special, even cruel way, thus ensuring its own survival. Their current leader, Tyrant Jamad, was considered an extremely dangerous and ferocious troll whose power struck fear into even the neighboring tribes. Kang-sul's task was to weaken the Stonefang tribe by any means necessary, and ideally to destroy at least one of the tribe's leaders. However, the system warned that if he did not achieve his goal, the young man would face certain death, and he had only 20 hours and 47 minutes left. The hero figured that it was almost noon, which meant that if he left right now, he would only be able to reach the safe zone by tomorrow morning. In the world of adventure, rest was rarely given, only after every 2 completed missions, and the current one, dedicated to the 5 brothers, was one of those where increased difficulty was to be expected. He had 5 targets to choose from, and all of them were located in mountainous terrain where the trolls knew every rock and every trail. The task promised to be difficult, especially given the strong security. After thinking for a moment, Kang-sul realized that he had only one possible way to pass this test. Based on the description, the adventure was designed for a group of 5 participants, but the guy couldn't understand why he was here alone. There was too little time left, and he had to start moving as soon as possible. Otherwise, the timer would inexorably reduce his chances of success. The hero remembered that last time the system had given him exactly 6 hours, but now the timer showed a strange number, 20 hours and 47 minutes. This uneven number seemed suspicious, and soon a guess struck him. It seemed that the rest of the squad for which the test was intended had perished, and the time had been distributed among the survivors. The guy looked thoughtfully at the red glow of the system screen and realized that now he would have to complete the task alone. Having made his decision, Kang-sul moved forward, and soon his attention was drawn to a guard post located at the foot of the mountains. A green flag fluttered in the wind, a symbol that Kang-sul recognized immediately. The Stone Fang tribe raised this flag only on special occasions, when they asked for the blessing of the Earth Dragon Tangrid during the Harvest Festival. This place was the lower level of the Stone Fang tribe's domain, the border where the Troll's lands began, and where his new trial was now taking place. The boy tensed and looked around even further, and in the distance he saw a terrible sight. All around were the dead, people slain by a barbarian people, and a chill ran down his spine at the sight. Looking closely at their clothes and armor, he began to distinguish the roles of the fallen. One was clearly a priest, judging by his heavy armor and symbols. 2 were vanguards, and another was an archer. A good combination for a team. The priest, 2 vanguards, and an archer, with proper coordination, could have gone through this adventure without a bloody massacre. But now there was no point in looking back and crying over what had been lost. Spilled milk could not be returned, and regrets would not fix anything. The guy was left alone and had to quickly figure out a strategy, because a solo mission greatly complicates all options for action. Kang-sul thoughtfully scratched his chin and realized that he would have to use the very method he had been thinking about for a long time. The system notified him that the hero had arrived in a mountain village and could choose to attack the houses in order, minimizing ambushes, or take cover for the night and return with a plan. There were 20 hours and 39 minutes left, and the hero firmly decided that he would go through this adventure to get the best reward he could possibly earn. The world of eternity always reacted to the actions of its participants in its own way. Here, even a single step could change the course of history. Every action of a character in the adventure affected the very fabric of the world, and if his method worked, he would write a new legend in the chronicles. The first option was obvious: attack the houses in order, starting with the closest ones. But Kang-sul understood perfectly well how insanely dangerous this was, even with Karen's help. The second option, to wait until nightfall and launch a raid under the cover of darkness, seemed tempting. But when a warrior is alone, it is very risky. Therefore, the young man settled on the third option: to explore the area, gather information, and understand where the enemy's weak spot was. First of all, he was interested in the exile of the Rocky Mountains, a strange figure who was only spoken of in whispers. According to the information, there were 5 peaks in these mountains, and the Stonefang tribe lived on the highest one, while the others were inhabited by secondary but no less dangerous creatures. In the 5 brothers' trial, this exile played a key role. He had to be found first in order to open the hidden path. Legends claim that the exile was hiding at the foot of the lowest peak, where eternal shadow blocked out the sunlight, and lived there alone, rejected by his own people. Kang-sul frowned and exhaled quietly. If the legend was true, then this guy was already somewhere nearby. As the young man made his way through the trees, he noticed a rope with bells hanging below. Despite their small size, the sound was quite loud, and the bells were enchanted to warn of the appearance of an intruder. The next moment, Kang-sul heard the voice of a local monster announcing that it had spotted a human. The guy took a few quick, careful steps forward so as not to provoke a threat. After that, the hero said that there was no need to be afraid, that he was completely harmless, while the monster tried to stop him. With a trembling voice, the troll asked if it was really a human in front of him. Kang-sul thought that the person he was interested in was probably hiding somewhere nearby. He approached a little closer and said that he had no evil intentions, noticing that the creature was still watching him warily. The system notified him that the outcast was clearly afraid of him and offered several options for action. The guy decided to follow one of the hints, noticed that something was clearly wrong with this troll, and asked what the problem was, why he didn't want him to come closer. There was a moment of silence, and at that moment a deathly silence hung in the air. After a moment, the young man suggested that perhaps its behavior was due to illness. Kang Sol knew this for sure, but decided to act as if he had no idea. Meanwhile, the troll came out of the bushes and showed his wounds caused by the disease. The monster explained that due to the terrible infection, no one should approach him. After that, the troll said that he had shown enough and did not want to reveal anymore. The young man replied that he really wanted to hear the details, which was why he had come here. However, it was difficult to communicate from a great distance, and the troll said that the young man must be crazy because he could become infected if he approached. The monster couldn't understand why the guy was so persistent and wondered why he needed this information at all. The hero said he wanted to hear any information the troll would tell him. After thinking for a moment, the companion lowered his head and headed towards his dwelling. The system reported that the monster had let his guard down a little, while the guy said that it would be better to talk inside and warned that he would not be responsible for the consequences of this conversation. The viewers were shocked, thinking that this guy must be crazy because he was going where he risked getting infected with the disease. Meanwhile, the travelers had already entered the room, and the young hero was surprised to notice a stack of books there. The troll hospitably offered tea, and in response, the guy said that he would not refuse tea, but first wanted to hear the story. The troll began to tell him a little about himself to give him a complete picture of the situation. In the past, the Rocky Mountains had been struck by an endemic disease that lasted for several generations and claimed many lives. Therefore, the inhabitants of the Stonefang tribe established one rule to get rid of the disease. According to this rule, anyone who fell ill and posed a threat to everyone else was to be banished. Kang Sol asked if that meant his companion had also been expelled, but he shook his head. His mother was pregnant with him when she fell ill, and when she did, she was sent away. She begged to leave her child in the tribe, but it didn't work. The elders decided that the child could spread the disease. Although they did not know the truth at the time, the troll was indeed born with the disease. She held a grudge against them until her death and wanted everything to disappear. Kang Sol curiously decided to clarify what everything meant and how to understand it. The troll said that she wanted the Stonefang tribe to disappear, as well as this cursed disease. The next moment, he added that he himself would also like to disappear. The monster had read many books to find out how to cure this disease and had obtained information about endemic diseases. Thanks to this, he discovered that the infection was curable if the necessary ingredients were available. This would require a corpse finger mushroom, which could be found in these mountains, and Kang Sol thoughtfully said that he probably wouldn't be able to do that. The monster replied that the problem was in his bones, and the more the disease progressed, the more it affected him. And now he couldn't even climb up there. After thinking for a moment, Kang Sol said that there was a solution. He could search for it instead. The monster looked at his companion in confusion and asked why he needed to do that. Instead of answering, the young hero smiled and looked him straight in the eye. It was in his interest to study the troll leaders and the problems associated with them and to gather the best story. Besides, the boy would save this troll, so he offered to make a small deal. Thus began a hidden adventure called The Abandoned. The boy ran swiftly through the forest in search of the ingredients he needed. As they parted ways, the troll said that if this young man could help him, he would repay him in any way he could. Meanwhile, based on the situation, the system instructed the young man to find a corpse finger mushroom, an additional quest that would appear in the middle of the adventure and help him move forward. Kang Sol thought that the abandoned quest stood out from the rest, because only here could he get an NPC helper for his character. Helpers strengthen their masters by building equal trust with them, and, if memory serves, Abandoned is one of the high-level ones. In every adventure, every second counts, but this quest was worth the time spent, because if he managed to get an ally, even a hopeless situation would be successful. When the guy approached his destination, he cursed in irritation. The other spectators also noticed that the situation was not good at all. They were already prepared for this hero to die. It was strange why he had decided to take on this quest in the first place. But in any case, this guy is hopeless. The rest of the group has already lost to Magada's weakest brother, and this one will die too. It's only a matter of time. Meanwhile, the young hero approached the edge of a large overhanging rock and looked down with interest. The system reported that the terrain perception process had begun to activate. There were no mushrooms in sight yet, and the hero was faced with a choice. Wait, explore the surroundings, return with a report, or check whether the local environment was suitable for their growth. Suddenly, Kang Sol remembered that he had once come here for the first time with the first figure he had created. This was where his adventure in the world of eternity began. 17 years ago, it was a mage, and the boy instantly ran to the peak, filled with excitement about the abandoned quest. He didn't know then that the dream would repeat itself for many years to come. The guy chose the second option and began by carefully searching the area. At that moment, the young hero was in a hurry and made many mistakes. He neglected basic caution and soon paid for it. At that time, Kang Sol did not understand how to control the characters at all and was very upset. The first figure died after falling off a cliff due to carelessness while searching for a mushroom for the abandoned quest. Absurd as it may seem, this kind of thing happens often in life. The mage lacked strength and agility and was completely unsuited for searching in such dangerous places. A character with such a class and rank would not have survived for long, and Kang Sol's wrong choice led to his death. His adventure ended there, and it became a personal tragedy for little Kang Sol. The boy took it very hard, and even years later, the memory remained painful. But thanks to this lesson, he was able to gain experience that would help him achieve success, and now the time had almost come. A moment later, a strange loud sound came from nearby. Since his first defeat, Kang Sol had learned a lot about the abandoned quest, namely about the quest item, the corpse finger mushroom. It appears from the rock at dusk when the day ends and the sun sets below the horizon. The young hero picked up his staff and activated his magical abilities. The Shadow Hand was activated, a basic skill of shadow summoners that creates a hand with little physical strength. The effect is simple but useful in many situations. It was extremely difficult to do this for the first time, and Kang Sol doubted whether he could do it. The next moment, he resolutely pointed his hand straight at the mushroom, and the audience held their breath. It is extremely difficult to control, and it is hard to even imagine how this guy will manage such a task. They joked that the young man should have been born with a tail, then it would have been much easier for him, but Kang Sol himself was completely focused on completing the attempt. The next moment, he carefully reached out his hand, putting all his effort into pulling out the mushroom. When he managed to grab it, all he had to do was pull harder, and the task was accomplished. The guy raised his head and watched the movement of his hand's shadow with excitement. A moment later, his hand approached him, and Kang Sol looked closely to see if he had succeeded. When the hand opened, there was the mushroom he needed to get. The guy looked around thoughtfully, noticing a glow on the branches of the trees. Meanwhile, the system reported that perception had been activated and the hidden quest, Pocket Watch Without an Owner, had begun. A moment later, the conditions appeared on the screen. It was another additional task. He had to find someone who knew about the lost watch in the city of Kongori. Upon closer inspection, a small wristwatch was indeed visible on the branch. Kang Sol reached out his shadow hand, and the viewers guessed that he was going to take it. However, no one even knew what kind of watch it was, so they had to consult the guide. There was no information about it, and none of the viewers could even imagine what kind of artifact it was. Meanwhile, a fire crackled merrily under the pot, and fragrant food was cooking in the vessel. The troll sat by the fire and watched the crackling flames thoughtfully. The monster did not know whether he could trust the man, and these doubts tormented his soul, giving him no peace. An image floated into Mal's mind of his mother lying bedridden, tormented by illness. She said that everything should disappear, she didn't want to see anyone, and she hated the whole world with a passion. It was the curse of dying flesh, the terrible legacy of the savage Stone Fang tribe, those useless bastards. In her despair, she cursed her own son Mal, saying that he too must disappear along with this world. Mal could not hope that the disease would disappear on its own, so he decided to look for a cure. He read human books. At first, it was difficult for him to understand anything, but soon he mastered the letters, using an old spell book left behind by his mother. The more the troll studied, the closer he got to finding a cure, but the disease progressed faster than his knowledge. He had to hurry and prepare the cure before the symptoms became unbearable and find a mushroom that grew only at the top of the peak. Was it the right decision to ask the first person he met for help? Mal couldn't find the answer to that question. The troll sighed deeply and suddenly heard a rustle at the edge of the forest. Someone was approaching. A few moments later, he noticed some movement in the bushes. The monster looked straight ahead warily, sure that the guy had returned. A moment later, Mal saw a familiar figure. It was Kang Sol, slightly out of breath and tired. The guy came closer and said he had brought a mushroom, adding that the infection hurt much more than he had expected. The young hero held a magical medicine in his hands and Mal stared at it in admiration. It was exactly the rare ingredient he had been dreaming of. The troll couldn't believe what was happening at first. His lips trembled and his eyes filled with tears. He could hardly comprehend that someone had actually helped him. In gratitude, Mal knelt before Khan's soul, acknowledging him as a savior. He wanted to know the name of this brave and kind young man who had risked his life for him. Kang Sol said that the troll could call him Snowman. The monster told Mael his name, which meant Child of the Stars, and promised that he would repay the favor by helping Kang Sol in any way he could. The troll couldn't help but cry, because no one had ever shown him such kindness before, and he swore that he would never forget the help he had received. Meanwhile, the system notified that Kang Sol had rescued the abandoned child and received help, after which the adventure was completed. After some time, the young hero completely cured his illness on his own, and as a reward, his endurance increased by 2 levels. Mal also began to recover and was soon completely cured. Filled with gratitude, the monster promised that he would always come to the aid of the young hero if he found himself in trouble. The system informed Kang Sol that he could choose how Mal would support him and warned him that the decision should be carefully considered. After reviewing all the options, the boy came to the conclusion that a direct attack would not be successful and that the tribe could only be destroyed from within. Mal realized that the task would not be easy, but a bold idea was already forming in his mind. After some time, the hero approached the settlement where the Stone Fang tribe lived. He had to act today because the harvest festival was about to begin. Kan's soul cautiously peeked out from his hiding place behind a large, massive tree and watched the guards. That night, the tribe was holding a festival in honor of Tangrid, the earth dragon they worshipped, and there were strict rules that no one dared to break. All members of the tribe must drink the blood of animals from a huge cauldron, and participation is considered a sacred ritual. Mal said he had a special potion that could be mixed into the cauldron at the festival, which would seriously weaken their powers. Kang Sol asked what would happen to his new friend if he was caught, but the troll did not flinch and reminded himself of his mother's last words. The monster understood that his own disappearance would not fix everything, but at least he would give his mother the destruction of the tribe she had dreamed of. This task was named Suppressed Revenge, and Mal gave Kang Sol an elixir to mix into the cauldron during the harvest festival. After that, Mael left, and the old hut den was engulfed in flames, while the troll took only the medicine for the disease with him. He also took an old book with blank pages, and the boy asked him why he needed it. The troll confessed that he had always dreamed of becoming an archaeologist, that the world was vast, full of secrets and ancient things that needed to be recorded and preserved. Turning to his savior, Mal said that he wanted to repay him and help punish their enemies with what he called the Star of Reason. The system announced that the young hero had received the achievement, Lonely to be Alone, and the title, Attractive Creature. It looked pretty good. In the future, such bonuses could play a decisive role, especially if things didn't go according to plan. But now it was time to act. Kang Sol looked thoughtfully at the elixirs he had received, the weapons on which the entire operation depended. In his hands were 2 vials, a red one that turned him into a troll at the cost of his sanity, and a blue one that gave him rage, ferocity, and complete fearlessness. Kang Sol picked up the red vial, felt a slight chill run through his fingers, and slowly unscrewed the cap. The liquid had a tart smell reminiscent of rusty metal, but he did not hesitate and drank it all in one gulp. In that same second, a wave of heat swept through his body. His muscles seemed to flare up from within, and his bones creaked painfully as they changed shape. The guy staggered, barely keeping his balance, and suddenly realized that his vision was blurring, his hearing was intensifying, and his skin was roughening, turning into a gray, rough crust. At that moment, the guards standing nearby became alert, hearing the noise, and began to look around intently. They found one of their comrades and asked him what he was doing there, since no one was allowed to leave the village until the festival was over. Kang Sol, who had turned into a troll, replied that he would join them now, and they angrily scolded him and demanded that he march forward immediately. The system announced that the young man could now understand the language of trolls and had received the wood skill for 1 day. The guy walked past the guards and headed onward. All that remained was to find the cauldron and pour out the elixir. The cauldron was surely somewhere inside, and Kang Sol walked down the gloomy corridor of the cave on the rocky floor. The Stonefang tribe lives in the mountain peaks and consists of 5 warring factions that unite only for important reasons, and are ruled by their leaders. The shamans consulted, but the chiefs have grown weak, the tribe is weakening, and now is the best moment for a decisive strike. Kang Sol approached a huge cauldron. Apparently, he had reached his destination. Animal blood was boiling in it. The young man picked up a blue bottle and thought that now was the time to begin the operation. However, in the next moment, one of the trolls noticed him and asked what he had in his hands. Kang Sol said he would like to donate the blood he had collected today, but was told that there was already enough blood for the sacrifice. The young man insisted that it was the blood of a white Aragos and that it would definitely not hurt, giving them additional strength. The monster thoughtfully asked if this was true and stared at the vial with doubt. After a moment, he agreed and said he would transfer the contents to the altar, after which Kang Sol bowed and thanked him. The Stonefang tribe believed that offering a worthy sacrifice would bring the blessing of Tangrid, the Earth Dragon. The blood of the white Aragos was extremely rare in these mountains and therefore particularly valuable. The chief took the bottle of elixir that was handed to him and looked at it thoughtfully. Then he opened the cap and sniffed it to distinguish it and understand what kind of substance it was. After checking, the leader declared that the blood was indeed good and could be added to the cauldron. They would not be able to detect the potion because Mal had disguised it as blood, and the rank of the abandoned one gave Kang Sol the necessary advantages. The monster, unsuspecting, poured the contents of the vial into the boiling and bubbling bloody mess. The elixir was added to the festival cauldron, and now everyone who drank it would be overcome with mad fury. And meanwhile, midnight was approaching. The leader said that all the blessings they receive are bestowed by the earth, blood and flesh, even those obtained by violence. The monsters raised their cups, preparing to drink and spill new blood in the name of Lord Tangrid. This was the way of their entire tribe, and cries and loud cheers rang out throughout the area. Trolls from all factions of this savage tribe gathered in the square, and among the monsters gathered here were the leaders. Looking more closely, Kang Sol noticed several trolls sitting a little apart, with an important look on their faces. Mal warned him that the reason the tribe still existed, despite its eternal strife, lay in one creature. This was the one who had single-handedly destroyed all the shamans of the previous generation, born of the very power of the mountains, the wisest and strongest troll in the history of Stonefang. His name was Tyrant Jamad, an incredibly powerful creature that no mortal could defeat. Some time passed, and the harvest festival finally came to an end. All the trolls drank blood mixed with the elixir of madness, each getting at least a drop. Even the leaders received a dose of the potion, although its effect varied depending on the power of the troll. Kang Sol understood that in an hour the whole tribe would be overcome with frenzy and decided it was time to leave before something unexpected happened. Tonight, the Stonefang tribe would disappear forever and never appear on the face of the earth again. The young hero set out to complete the next part of his mission and cautiously peered out from behind the thick bushes. Before him lay the tribe's treasure trove, a place known only to a select few. The spectators wondered how this young man could know where it was located. Meanwhile, Kang Sol reflected that Stonefang's most valuable possessions were stored here, guarded by warriors who did not belong to any faction. Although they were not as strong as the leaders, they were still formidable and powerful opponents. The next moment, one of the trolls suddenly brought his ferocious paw down on the other, and the elixir began to take effect. The other looked at his friend in confusion, not understanding why his partner had suddenly gone mad. However, the second one had already gone completely mad, shouting that his friend must die and pay his debt to Lord Tangrid. At that moment, the troll ordered more blood to be shed and suddenly received a fatal wound himself. Karuna cut off his head with a lightning-fast sword stroke and stepped forward confidently. Kang Sol understood that it would be difficult to deal with these creatures under the influence of the potion, even with Karupa's help. The young hero ordered his subordinate to go inside and decided that they would go there together. A guard stood at the massive doors, completely confused, not understanding what was happening to him. The next moment he turned around, sensed someone's presence, and asked loudly who was there. It was too late to leave, so Karuna stepped forward decisively, without hesitation. The young man leapt into the air, clutching a gleaming weapon in his hands, ready to deliver the decisive blow. In the next moment, he struck his opponent with a crushing blow without hesitation, giving him no chance to defend himself. The troll was just trying to figure out who this guy was and where he came from. But Karuna did not answer, only fiercely swinging his weapon, and his sword flashed with a reflection of fire, illuminating the entire area. The tip of the blade approached the guard's neck, and sensing mortal danger, he roared and struck back. In the next moment, there was a clang of metal, followed by a dull thud. The fight was over, and Karuna, breathing heavily, looked at his fallen opponent with a mixture of rage and satisfaction. Kan's soul watched the scene with cold interest and thought to himself that his subordinate's strength was still impressive, albeit weakened. In the past, Karuna could have dealt with such an enemy with a single blow, but now only a shadow of his former power remained. Still, the victory had brought results. The key that had hung from the guard's belt was now in the hands of the young hero. Kan's soul approached the massive gates entwined with heavy chains, behind which the tribe's treasure trove was hidden. The boy could open the treasure chamber doors with the key, take it away, decipher the engraved spell, make a copy, or hide nearby and wait for the right moment. He knew perfectly well that behind the door was a gift not for mere mortals, a gift from the earth dragon Tangrid, stone fists, gloves forged from petrified scales. These gloves gave monstrous strength, breaking rocks and amplifying earth and metal spells. But their price was terrible. Centuries of bloody rituals, battles, and feuds within the clan. To put an end to the endless slaughter, an ancient shaman placed a brotherly curse on the leaders. A brother's killer would turn to stone, but the hatred would live on in their descendants. Such was the grim history of this clan, and so the current task was given the ironic name, Friendly Brothers Again. Kang's soul took the key and decided not to touch the gloves. Chaos would do its work, and the mad leaders would rush to the treasury themselves. And then, seeing the dead guards, they would decide that one of them had betrayed the others. Kang's soul understood that this was enough to reignite the flames of mutual hostility. Meanwhile, the tribe's chieftain furiously ordered the gate to be broken down, and in the next moment, there was a loud crash. A powerful explosion shook the earth, and the night was lit up with flames. When the monsters entered the treasury, the air there was thick and heavy, saturated with the smell of ash and ancient magic. They looked around frantically, hoping to see the legendary Earth Dragon gloves. But they noticed who had taken them and claimed them for themselves, and then fear mixed with rage settled in their hearts. One of their own had done this. Suspicions first fell on Tyrant Jamad, too strong and proud to tolerate equals. The chiefs hissed, baring their fangs, and were already preparing to attack. But Jamad roared so loudly that the floor shook. He reminded them that they were bound by a brotherly curse, that none could kill another without paying with his own life. One of the elder shamans said that now was not the time for strife, that the tribe was tearing itself apart, and if the chiefs began to fight, the remnants of their power would perish with them. Another supported him, reminding them that madness was taking over everything, and that they needed to save at least those who were still sane. After much deliberation, they decided to stay and guard the ruins of the treasury until new doors could be installed. But at that very moment, one of the leaders, sensing something was wrong, looked up. His eyes widened as a strange glow flared up on the ceiling among the stone slabs. Meanwhile, the settlement was completely dark, with many trolls lying on the floor. The chief cursed. Their dwelling was completely destroyed. Everything was smashed and broken. First, he needed to deal with the anger that was overwhelming him, and then with everyone else. Suddenly, he noticed that someone was there and asked who it was. The system informed Khan's soul that the shaman of the land of Magate had recognized his true nature, and therefore the effect of the potion was interrupted, his body was changing, and the language of the trolls was becoming permanent. The young hero did not think he would be caught so quickly and was slightly confused, but this was not surprising. Although the enemy was the weakest among his brothers, he was still the leader. Meanwhile, Magate angrily remarked that he now understood who it was and growled fiercely. The next moment, the troll pushed off the ground decisively, intending to take revenge for this man destroying their tribe. However, Kang's soul cold-bloodedly called Karun for backup, and his powerful friend's eyes flashed fiercely. After a while, an incredible and furious battle continued between them. Magate got to his feet and could barely stand, but he still retained his ferocity. Karuna, meanwhile, used the Moonlight Strike, the first phase of the crescent moon. With his last ounce of strength, the shaman said that his brothers would surely avenge him. The system reported that Magate was holding a grudge against the snowman, and for this he was punished with sluggishness and a 50% reduction in strength and agility for a week. However, along with this, experience points were received for defeating him. Kang's soul thought that this curse would have almost no effect on him because the summoner did not rely on strength and agility. Meanwhile, the goal of the adventure had been achieved, and the young hero approached the torch hanging on the wall. The next moment, he threw it decisively and thought that the brothers' revenge would surely not take place. It seemed that they would not have time for that because the settlement was in incredible and frenzied chaos. Monsters shrouded in the magic of madness were experiencing frenzied rage and were unable to control it. All the trolls had fought each other and now lay dead on the ground. Soon the leaders arrived at the Stonefang clan's meeting hall to see what was happening. One of them shouted loudly, calling for Tyrant Jamad, and his voice echoed throughout the dungeon. They knew he was there and demanded that the leader come out and show himself. He was silent for a few moments, and a tense silence hung in the cave. But soon the troll turned around and said with predatory anger, "Have they finally come, my dear brothers?" Meanwhile, Kang Soul returned to base, lit a fire, and calmly prepared dinner, which caused complete bewilderment among the observers. This madman calmly set about preparing his meal, and some of the spectators even defended the guy, saying that maybe he was just hungry. Besides, it was unclear what kind of talent he had, perhaps a secondary one, of little use without a recipe. The guy used moon seeds, and their special feature was that they could be used in different ways. The audience couldn't understand where he got the recipe, but Kang Soul was aware that moon seeds had different effects. They can be divided into two categories: increasing attribute points or temporarily acquiring skills. In another situation, the young man would have chosen stat points, but now for the final battle, he needed a temporary skill. The guy knew the most common way to use them: process the seeds and add them to food. The broth turned out to be surprisingly flavorful. The beginner's luck worked. The taste was a little weak without spices, but in the midst of chaos, even warm food in a surviving house were a miracle. After a while, the hero ate, and the special effect of the moon seed was activated. Kang Soul received the moon phase skill for one day. Meanwhile, the shamans went to Tyrant Jamad and immediately warned him to choose his words carefully before making excuses. He was under suspicion, so they demanded that he answer honestly and not try to evade the question. The shamans were sure that someone had taken advantage of the chaos and killed Magat. Tyrant Jamad did not rush to answer, but thought to himself that Magat had indeed died. Now it was clear that an outside enemy had infiltrated the tribe and caused all this chaos. Most likely everyone had gone mad because of the blood they had drunk at the great festival. Someone had mixed a potion into the drink to drive the tribe mad. That was the stranger's true plan. The scoundrel attacked the treasury, took the key, and then took Magat out of the game. These fools couldn't have come up with such a cunning plan. Their limited minds are incapable of such things. Such a cunning move was indeed reminiscent of Tyrant Jamad, so the brothers rightly suspected him. Meanwhile, the leaders noticed the stone fists in his hands and indignantly said that he had stolen them. Surely not just for the gloves. Let the scoundrel not count on a quick death. A traitor of this level will indeed pay for everything. Tyrant Jamad approached the brothers decisively, his gloves glistening, and said that it was indeed his doing. The trolls shouted angrily that his power did not match his arrogance and asked if the scoundrel was not afraid of a curse. With these words, the monsters grabbed their weapons and sharp clubs, preparing to kill the traitor. Tyrant Jamad acted swiftly and decisively, each of his movements precise and powerful. The monster gathered all his strength and swung his huge, powerful fist. Then he delivered a crushing blow that shook the air. His gloves flashed with bright fire, shattering stones that flew in all directions. The others were amazed by his strength, unable to believe that Tyrant Jamad could possess such frenzied power. At that moment, one of the trolls felt a powerful blow and screamed in panic. The others began to scatter rapidly, hoping that they would not suffer the same fate. The mud shaman Miam harbored a grudge against Tyrant Jamad, causing him to fall ill, weaken, and suffer more frequent magical failures. Now Jamad understood why they had attacked him, for they had been eagerly awaiting the opportunity to kill him and take his place as chief of the tribe. Did they really want this so badly, even though the tribe had fallen into decline? His opponent said that Tyrant Jamad still relied on his gloves, but that was not a power that a single shaman could handle. The next moment, he delivered a crushing blow that sent Tyrant Jamad reeling. The opponent shouted angrily that if the mountains were to be drenched in the blood of their tribe, then so be it. The shaman delivered one blow after another with determination, but Tyrant Jamad skillfully parried all attacks. A moment later, he gathered momentum and knocked his opponent off his feet with a swift lunge. He then delivered a crushing blow and declared that blood should belong only to the weakest. Then Shaman Gravia Trog also harbored resentment, and Tyrant Jamad lost his balance, distorted his perception, and lost 70% of his strength and accuracy. Their fight finally ended, and the defeated enemy sat exhausted, leaning against the wall. After his death, the Stone Shaman Tron left Tyrant Jamada with a grudge, and he developed a heart condition that would cause his stamina to drop throughout the week. The monster realized that he was the last of the leaders and had a duty to unite the remnants of the tribe to restore the lost balance. However, sudden footsteps nearby made him wary, and the troll turned around, wanting to see who had approached. Before his eyes appeared the silhouette of a young man who, without hesitation, swung his sword, causing the air to shudder from the clang of metal. The hero cut through the air with a swing of his huge, sharp blade, leaving behind a bright, magical light. The Tyrant Jamad looked ahead angrily and was surprised to see that the person standing before him was someone he had already met. It was Kang Sul, and next to him was Karuna, ready to fight again for his master. The young hero calmly remarked that the troll would be wise not to fight the brothers. After all, together they could achieve more, and now allies would not hinder him. The troll asked how this guy had managed to arrange all this. At that moment, Karuna took a few quick steps forward. He was under the influence of moonlight, which caused the moon's energy to charge into the boy faster. Tyrant Jamad lowered his head and thought that those fallen fools could never have pulled off anything like this. His gloves flashed like lightning, radiating frenzied power. The monster wondered if this devil really wanted to take his mountains. Kang Sul watched his opponent closely, never taking his eyes off him. The monster charged forward, growling that if the hero wanted to take the land, he should try to do so. They stood facing each other and swung their arms, preparing for a devastating blow. In the next moment, the opponents clashed in a fierce battle. Tyrant Jamad's gloves glowed brighter, filling with power. Karuna began to swing his weapon rapidly. Kang Sul watched them and thought that the fighters were almost equal in strength. Tyrant Jamad used stone fists, but he was tired after fighting his brothers. Therefore, Karuna must win this battle at all costs. The monster growled that climbing the mountain would not be as easy as it might seem. Karuna made another sharp lunge with his weapon, quickly blocking his opponent. Kang Sul looked straight ahead in slight confusion, trying to assess the situation. The battle between the combatants continued with renewed, frenzied force. At one point, Karuna began to slide across the ground. Bones cracked from the recoil of the summoned shadows, and it remained unknown whether 20% of his strength would be enough. The opponents continued to fight, Karuna's sword flashing with magic, and Tyrant Jamad relying on the strength of his stone gloves. Their enemy was weakened after the curse, but he still did not give up his position, holding his fury inside. He considered himself an impregnable rock and was confident that no one could break his will. At one point, Karuna decisively intercepted his opponent's blow and threw him back. The shaman who possesses the whole world, subjugates the elements. Everything on earth belongs to him, including the smallest particles of living matter. Karuna took a few steps back, feeling his strength rapidly leaving his body. Kang Sul realized that now they had no chance of turning the tide of battle. All they could do was wait for the moment when luck would turn in their favor. At that moment, Tyrant Jamad spread his arms and prepared to summon a devastating earthquake. His fists slammed into the ground with great force, and streams of magical sparks shot up from the impact. The stones beneath the monster's feet began to move and scatter in all directions with a deafening clang. Karuna decisively cut through the falling debris with his sword, escaping the heavy boulders crashing down from above. The young man's gaze was focused and steady. He had no intention of retreating, despite the growing chaos. The Tyrant Jamad soared into the air, spinning his flaming gauntlets, which left trails of heat and smoke. His roar pierced the air, breaking the atmosphere around him and causing the ground beneath his enemy's feet to tremble. In the next second, the monster delivered a crushing blow, and Karuna's blade barely withstood the onslaught. Kang Sul froze, realizing that the battle was not going according to plan and that the balance of power was collapsing before his eyes. The stone gloves gave the enemy incredible power, but with it came a devastating recoil. The young man tried in vain to understand what he had missed, because the enemy should have already fallen. The Tyrant Jamad declared that anger filled his body, and he was ready to unleash his wrath on the whole world. Kang Sul realized with alarm that the stone gloves had not weakened the monster, but only strengthened it. The enemy swung his fist and declared that he would crush his enemies with one decisive blow. The monster roared, promising to tear apart the invaders who dared to set foot in his domain. Karuna continued to swing his sword furiously, deflecting wave after wave of blows. Kang Sol realized that his fists were consuming energy, but for some reason his opponent's strength was growing. The stone gloves began to change, turning into majestic mountain fists. This was mentioned in ancient records that spoke of the secret will of the world of eternity. Kang Sol wondered why the monster's strategy had remained unchanged for so many years, yet had still failed. From an outcast to a fratricide, he had fallen completely, becoming a prisoner of the curse of malice. The difficulty of this adventure depended on who became stronger and disrupted the balance between the brothers. Then Tyrant Jamad became a new variable, forcing Kang Sol to order his comrade to be more careful. Suddenly, Karuna received a powerful blow that threw him several meters back. The young man barely managed to catch his comrade before he hit the rocks and lost consciousness. In the next moment, the space shook from an explosion released by Tyrant Jamad. Kang Sol fell to the ground, feeling his body disobey him, and his throat constricted with pain. From the new blow, the guy collapsed face down and felt the cold stone floor. He opened his eyes slightly and saw his opponent, whose rage was becoming more and more terrifying and insane. Half conscious, the hero realized that the best option now was not to attack, but to retreat. He remembered his childhood when he watched fights and dreamed of becoming the one who always wins. Memories from the past flooded back suddenly, forcing the guy to relive the events of those distant times. At that time, the legend of the snowman did not yet exist. He was the leader of a group of figures, and their group found itself in mortal danger. The masked man said that it was impossible to save everyone, and that part of the team would have to be sacrificed. The snowman realized that he faced a difficult choice, to run or to fight, but he decided not to retreat. The others were surprised because new figures could be created, but the young man was not talking about soulless puppets. The hero meant the living people who walked beside him and believed in him until the very end. The players did not understand why he was willing to risk everything for useless figures. But the young man always chose to face challenges head-on, and now he had to make another choice. After a moment's thought, the young hero decided that his third move would be to strike the giant Zura's ankle with his sword. The players watching him were skeptical, because the probability of success was extremely low. Meanwhile, Snowman had to make his next move, and he took the risk. The dice had already been thrown and were spinning rapidly in the air. Kang Sol watched its movement with bated breath and could only hope for a miracle. The guy got to his feet and stood behind Karun, who was continuing the battle with his last ounce of strength. The enemy roared furiously and promised to finish them off once and for all, sparing no one. The monster was preparing to cause a landslide, and at that moment, Kang Sol realized that he had been unconscious for a long time. At that moment, Karun's moonlight entered its third phase, reaching the power of a full moon. The moment for the decisive blow had come, and Tyrant Jamad cursed his enemies, promising to crush them. The shaman swore in rage to wipe his enemies off the face of the earth, leaving not even a shadow behind. Then Kang Sol stepped forward decisively and activated his magic staff, ready for the final battle. The system reported that he had activated the full moon phase skill, maximizing his abilities. At that moment, the enemy cast a landslide spell, and the earth shook, spreading throughout the dungeon. Karuna raised his sword above his head, and the blade flashed with a dazzling flame, reflecting off the stone walls. The curtain rose above the lunar scene, and the Moon Knight Karuna confidently raised his head to meet his fate. The enemy rushed forward, scattering cobblestones and rocks with powerful thrusts of his gigantic strength. Karuna gathered all his determination to repel the blow and moved swiftly toward the approaching enemy. Magical circles and pictograms flared up around him, filling the entire cave with light. Tyrant Jamad watched with fury on his face, his gaze flashing like fire in a raging storm. The young warrior's stats increased, half under the moonlight, while his allies' stats decreased by 20%. The boy calmly said that the full moon had already risen and reminded his opponent of the need to remain humble. The enemy was confused and asked in bewilderment how to understand these words. At that moment, Kang Sol encouraged his comrade, telling him not to dare lose because the battle was not over yet. Karuna slowly said that he had come to fulfill his destiny, and his voice sounded like the call of the moonlight itself. The system reported that there were enough attribute points to activate the final stage of the skill. The full moon's crescent widened, transforming into the final blow of the shining moonlight. Tyrant Jamad felt a powerful magical impact, barely managing to stay on his feet from the force of the energy. But in the next second, there was a monstrous explosion, and Kang Sol, unable to withstand it, stumbled backward. When the dust settled, it became clear that the enemy was defeated, exhausted, and barely able to get up from the ground. His gloves were still smoldering with fire, but they no longer possessed their former devastating power. The monster couldn't believe that this man was the Lord of Shadows, the one who had started it all. In silence, the young man looked at his opponent and took a few steps toward him. Tyrant Jamad said to take him away from this place. He was ready to listen to and obey such a fighter. The troll could not end his journey here, for there were things that had to be done no matter what. At that moment, Karuna jumped decisively next to him and swung his magic sword. The shaman fell to the ground, leaving his resentment toward the snowman behind, but he still died. The system said that the snowman would get a skin disease, and all his stats would go down by 30% for a week. But since all 5 Stonefang brothers were defeated, the hero was freed from the grudge, and Tyrant Jamad was defeated by the snowman. The reward was received, Stonefang's treasure was upgraded to a sacred relic, and the adventure would be complete when the boy took the reward or the time ran out. The young hero looked at his achievements, and the audience praised him for his incredible power and coolness. Karuna also gained a new skill and incredible useful abilities, which the system immediately notified him of. Kangsul noticed that monsters usually hate becoming shadows because they are torn from the clutches of death, which is considered rest, and are forced to serve the one who killed them. But Tyrant Jamad himself asked to be taken along. A powerful troll, an unpredictable variable, one who destroys the initial settings of the world and exceeds expectations, it is not even known whether it would be a good idea to take him along. The young hero reached out his hand, thinking that it seemed that everything should indeed be this way. The boy ordered the decrepit Tyrant Jamad to serve, for victory would be incomplete if he were left here. A few moments later, a magical transformation began, and the shadow rapidly separated from the body. Finally, the process was successfully completed, and Tyrant Jamad was ready to follow this devil. The system reported that everything had ended well, the transfer attempt was complete, and Tyrant Jamad had acquired the skills to serve. A moment later, the monster turned to his master and said he had something to do, namely to collect the bodies of his brothers who had fallen in this difficult battle. The shaman calmly approached the lifeless, stiffened bodies. He released magical streams that reached each of the fallen brothers and used magic absorption. Kang Sol thought that this shaman clearly wanted to use magic absorption. The Tyrant Jamad took the magic of the throne, gaining 40% of its power. He said that they would always be together, even after death. Nothing would separate them. This mountain would be hidden within him, and the powerful leader felt all the power and agility of this magical system within himself. Meanwhile, there was